Chapter 1. Diving into the World of Medieval Reenactment. The Basics. Welcome to the wide world of medieval reenactment. This fun, unique hobby offers a lifetime's worth of opportunities that will keep you mentally and physically active. Before exploring everything medieval reenacting offers, let us first define the hobby and some guiding principles that all reenactors should follow. Tip 1. A brief definition of medieval reenactment. Medieval reenactment is where modern individuals study and recreate the lifestyles, pastimes, and traditions of people who lived between 1100 and 1500 AD. Many join the hobby due to a fascination with fantasy and swordplay. Thus, most reenactors enjoy donning armor and learning how to fight with historical weapons. However, medieval reenactment also has much to offer the non-combatant. Many people participate in the hobby by sewing medieval clothes, crafting medieval furniture, target shooting with wooden bows, and more. Today, individuals of all ages, genders, and backgrounds take part in reenactment groups worldwide. And although reenactment has historically lingered away from the public eye, the increased publicity surrounding Renaissance fairs and groups like the Society for Creative Anachronism have propelled the hobby closer to mainstream popularity. Pictures of Buhurt, a subtype of reenactment that involves intense sword fighting, have even been integrated into popular meme culture. Medieval reenactment, then, is a growing hobby with an ever-increasing number of diverse participants. While reenactment groups can differ widely from each other based on their location and focus, nearly all reenactors follow two basic principles: the right or not at all principle, and the document everything principle. Tip 2. The right or not at all principle. Because medieval reenactors aim to recreate actual people's lives from the Middle Ages, accuracy is an essential part of the hobby. Thus, reenactors follow the right or not at all principle. In essence, this principle means that anything a reenactor does as part of a hobby should either be completed to the highest historical accuracy standards, that is, right or not at all. For an example of this, pretend you want to get a tunic so you can take part in a public reenactment. A simple way to do this would be buying a cheap Halloween costume and passing it off as a medieval tunic. You would get the tunic you need for little money and effort. It might even look decent. However, if you wore this tunic to a public event, you would seriously harm the integrity of your reenactment group. Not only would this behavior suggest that your group cares little about accuracy, thus damaging its standing with other reenactment groups, it could also give observers the wrong idea about the Middle Ages, as they might assume that your fantasy costume is representative of authentic medieval clothes. Since a central goal of medieval reenactment is educating the public, this would spit in the face of the hobby's ideals. Therefore, it would have been better not to attend the event at all, or to attend in civilian clothes, than to attend it wearing a fake medieval costume. Of course, there are certain times when the right or not at all principle can be ignored. For example, although sharp blades would be more historically accurate for battle recreations, they are not used due to safety concerns. However, in most instances, the right or not at all principle is central to the integrity of medieval reenacting. Tip 3. The document everything principle. The only way to prove that something created for a medieval reenactment is right is by comparing it to an original source. Therefore, the second central principle that reenactors follow is that of documenting all source material. As an example of this, let's consider the tunic situation again. We'll say that this time, you put in the work to make a truly excellent medieval tunic. You find authentic sources online, buy 100% wool fabric, and sew your tunic yourself according to a reliable pattern. You also carefully document your sources, bookmarking them on your computer, so that you can refer to them frequently. And when a member of your group asks where you got the inspiration for your tunic, you gladly share your sources with them. In this instance, documenting your sources would not only demonstrate your integrity, but could also provide your fellow reenactor with ideas on how to make their tunic. Therefore, documentation of sources can showcase a reenactor's dedication to their hobby and spark the improvement of entire reenactment groups. Tip 4. Balancing accuracy, practicality, and fun. At first glance, the right or not at all and document everything principles might make medieval reenacting seem like more trouble than it's worth. After all, the tunic example suggests that following these two principles can sometimes be time-consuming and costly. But before you throw the towel in on this hobby, consider the following points. First of all, the two principles exist for a good reason. They aren't arbitrary rules meant to discourage newcomers. They're guidelines intended to uphold high-quality standards in reenactment groups. If these rules didn't exist, reenactors could do whatever they liked while claiming to represent the Middle Ages, thus fostering misunderstandings about an important period of history. Creative freedom certainly has its place in reenacting, but the principles of right or not at all and document everything ensure that this creativity is balanced with accuracy and authenticity. Secondly, there are plenty of times when bending the rules is acceptable, or even expected. Most veteran reenactors understand that the hobby can sometimes seem overwhelming, especially for newcomers. Therefore, they are more than willing to let little things like incorrect fabrics or hidden plastic armor slide. Additionally, many reenactors will happily lend, trade, or give away parts of their kit to newbies. Kit is the official term for a reenactor's equipment set. So, as long as you make a decent effort and ask for help when you need it, you can get away with breaking the right or not at all principle now and again. Finally, although teaching and accuracy are huge aspects of reenacting, the hobby's primary purpose is to have fun. Very few reenactors are rules lawyers. Instead, they're people who like playing pretend and think that rules lawyers are buzzkills. Therefore, as a new reenactor, you shouldn't stress too much about breaking the rules of reenacting. Instead, you should simply try your best, ask questions, relax, and enjoy yourself. Types of reenactment groups and their purposes. As you may have noticed, in the previous section, I made several references to reenactment groups. It is because medieval reenactment is a hobby best performed with other people. Reenactment groups often share ideas, sources, gear, labor, and even food, making the hobby easier, not to mention more fun. There are hundreds of medieval reenactment groups worldwide, each with its own rules, traditions, and atmospheres. These groups fall into three categories: national, international communities, independent groups, and groups that are not technically involved in medieval reenacting, but are closely connected to the hobby. National, international communities. Tip 5. Historical European Martial Arts, Hima. The Hima community is perhaps the largest and best-known reenactment community, as it encompasses hundreds of participants, clubs, and tournaments from across the world. In the Hima community, experienced instructors train students in combat using manuals written by medieval masters. The typical Himaist begins their training with a long sword, but may also learn to wield sabers, rapiers, dussaks, or various other weapons depending on their club's areas of interest. Most Hima participants train with the goal of someday attending a competitive Hima tournament. Still, plenty of others take part in the sport as a way of exercising and staying healthy. This choice is entirely up to the student. A good Hima instructor will never push a student to fight competitively, or do anything else for that matter, if the student is not comfortable with it. Because the purpose of Hima is to gain an in-depth understanding of historical combat methods, there is relatively little attention paid to obtaining accurate gear. Many Himaists will fight in street clothes and specialized Hima gear, such as lightweight protective jackets, fencing masks, and plastic armor. However, some Hima practitioners do develop accurate hard kits, suits of armor, to approximate the experience of fighting in historical conditions. Although Hima clubs offer few opportunities for non-combatants, leather crafters are almost always welcome, as leather armor can be a practical, more historically accurate replacement to plastic armor. Tip 6. Buhurt. Like the Hima community, the Buhurt community is a coalition of groups that focus on historically accurate combat. However, the similarities between the two organizations stop there. Buhurt is much more intense than Hima, as its participants engage in full contact, no-holds-barred combat with various weapons. It can include axes and greatswords, both of which are banned from most Hima clubs, due to the amount of damage they can cause to lightly armored participants. Fortunately, all Buhurt enthusiasts must be heavily armored to take part in the sport. Due to the activity's dangerous nature, Buhurt participants must wear full sets of sturdy armor with reliable head, torso, and limb protection. This armor is sometimes modeled after armor from the participants' preferred medieval era, but safety is prized over historical accuracy. In addition to wearing full armor, Buhurt participants must undergo rigorous training on safely landing and taking blows. Furthermore, individuals are rarely invited to join the sport unless they have prior experience with other reenactment groups. All in all, Buhurt groups are exclusive by necessity, but can be very welcoming if you prove that you're willing to put in enough time and effort to learn the ropes. Tip 7. The Society for Creative Anachronism, SCA. Although Hima is the largest international reenactment community by far, the SCA has gained a lot of traction in recent years, especially in the United States. The SCA comprises several highly structured kingdoms, each of which covers a country, region, or state. The kingdoms are further divided into local groups. These groups can pursue their interests as they please, but they must follow the SCA's somewhat complex rules about membership hierarchy and participation while doing so. In addition to rules about hierarchy, the SCA also possesses strict rules about who can fight at its events. To participate in official combat, an SCA member must first undergo official training with their chosen weapon. In the interest of safety, the SCA only allows its members to wield two types of melee weapons: rattan weapons, which are made of bamboo-like wood, and steel rapiers. Select SCA members can also practice combat archery with foam arrows, or learn how to use siege engines, but participation in these disciplines is comparatively rare. Regardless, once an SCA member has mastered their weapon, their local marshal will guide them through a skills test and grant them combat certification if they pass it. Only after the member has received this certification and assembled a hard kit that meets the SCA's guidelines will they be able to fight at SCA events. Fortunately, the SCA offers its members plenty of non-combative opportunities to participate. Unlike Hima and Buhurt groups, the SCA focuses almost equally on combative and non-combative medieval activities. At events, members can display their crafting skills, engage in sports such as archery and knife throwing, or even joust. Additionally, most local clubs offer weekly arts and sciences nights, where members can hone their non-combative skills. The SCA is an excellent community to join if you are looking for a reenactment organization that doesn't devote all its attention to combat. Tip 8. The Empire of Medieval Pursuits. The Empire of Medieval Pursuits is a Washington-based reenactment community that is slowly spawning branches across the United States and Canada. Its structure largely mirrors the SCA's, as it is composed of a kingdom divided into smaller factions. The Empire's focus also mirrors the SCA. It offers nearly equal opportunities for combative and non-combative involvement. However, the Empire's combat rules are much laxer than the SCA's. More specifically, its members do not need to be officially certified before they fight, and are allowed to use steel weapons other than rapiers, such as long swords and sabers. Although the Empire is relatively small compared to Hima, Buhurt, and the SCA, it is a stable community with a lot to offer. Independent reenactment groups. Tip 9. EventSpecific and EraSpecific groups. Hundreds of independent reenactment groups exist outside the international community's reach, and many of them are event or era-specific. In these groups, reenactors focus their efforts on accurately portraying specific time periods or historical events. An excellent example of this is La Belle Compagnie, a living history group that recreates the crafts, clothing, weapons, and armor of French and English citizens during the 100 Years' War, 1337 to 1453. Because these groups closely follow the right or not at all principle, they boast plenty of resources for new reenactors. These groups often attend multiple public events per year, which means that their members have lots of opportunities to show off their skills. However, for some of these groups, combat is nothing more than an afterthought. It can be a deal-breaker for some reenactors, as can the restriction to one specific time period. In short, event-specific and era-specific groups are definitely worth looking into, but might not be the right fit for everyone. Tip 10. Combat-focused groups. On the opposite end of the spectrum from era-specific independent groups are combat-focused independent groups. As the name suggests, these groups are more interested in combat than loyalty to any specific time period. As such, in these groups, 15th century reenactors might find themselves sparring with 12th century reenactors. Although combat-focused groups' attitudes towards armor, weapon, and clothing accuracy may differ, some allow their participants to spar in any functional armor. For example, as a member of a combat-focused group called the Knights of the North, I have fought opponents who wore Viking-style kits with pieces from different eras, or even kits of plastic Hima armor. Despite the name, most combat-focused groups do offer opportunities for non-combatants to participate. For instance, in the Knights of the North, some members attend events in soft kits, medieval clothes, and spend their time chatting and crafting. However, the amount of attention that these groups focus on combat can sometimes drive away reenactors who do not wish to fight. So, just like era-specific groups, combat-focused groups are worth looking into, but might not be right for everybody. Other groups associated with the hobby. Tip 11. Viking reenactment groups. The medieval reenactment groups discussed in the previous sections focus exclusively on the 1100s to 1500s AD. In contrast, Viking reenactment groups portray the 700s to 1000s. As a result, Viking reenactors' kits often look very different from medieval reenactors' kits, and the two groups tend to participate in slightly different activities. For example, some Viking reenactors wear leg wraps, but all medieval reenactors wear hosen. Additionally, steel plate armor did not exist in the Viking Age, so all combative Viking reenactors fight in chainmail. Aesthetic differences aside, independent Viking reenactment groups and medieval reenactment groups share somewhat similar structures. Both meet for private events regularly and attend public events once or twice per year. Additionally, both encourage their participants to make their kits as accurate as possible. Because of these similarities, many medieval reenactors develop Viking-style kits and vice versa. Therefore, if you enjoy the premise of medieval reenacting, but not its aesthetic, you may want to consider joining a Viking reenactment group. Tip 11. Live-action roleplay groups. LARP. LARP is an activity where people invent personas and act out storylines with foam weapons, spells, and pretend armor. Because LARP is about creating new stories rather than recreating history, it cannot be considered a medieval reenactment. That being said, it is a great deal of fun, and it can be a worthy alternative to reenacting if you're more interested in the fantasy side of reenactment than the historical side. Tip 13. Jousting Troops. As you likely know, if you have an interest in the Middle Ages, jousting is where armored riders use wooden lances to knock each other off their horses. In theory, modern jousting troops could be considered reenactment groups. In reality, however, most jousting groups are more focused on horsemanship than history. It is understandable, since exemplary horsemanship is necessary for a jouster's safety, but it also means that jousters often sport inauthentic weapons, clothing, and armor. Additionally, nearly all jousting shows are staged, making them very different from the impromptu combat performed by other reenactment groups. Therefore, although jousting is a noble hobby associated with the Middle Ages, medieval reenactors tend to keep their distance from professional jousting troops. Finding the right group for you. Now that you know a little bit more about the different types of medieval reenactment groups, you're ready to find the group that is right for you. Here are a few pointers on picking the perfect cohort of knights, damsels, and villagers to carouse with. Tip 14. Getting started. Believe it or not, reenactment groups are relatively easy to find. As mentioned before, Hima and the SCA have branches around the world. Additionally, most states and countries have at least one independent reenactment group, if not more. Therefore, chances are you will be able to find a reenactment group within driving distance of your home. Generally, the easiest way to locate medieval reenactment groups is through the internet. A web search for medieval reenactment groups near me might be useful, but looking for relevant social media groups may be even better, as nearly all reenactment groups have public pages for potential members. If after taking these measures you still can't find any information about groups near you, then consider joining a general Hima or SCA social media page and asking its members for help. Alternatively, if you are not a huge fan of web searches, consider attending a local Renaissance fair. Renaissance fairs frequently host performances by medieval reenactors. Even if there aren't any official reenactors in attendance, at least one shopkeeper or performer should have ties to a reenactment group. Ultimately, the best way to find a reenactment group is to dig around and ask lots of questions. Once you've found a local reenactment group, or several, the next step is to explore the specifics of the group and its purpose. After that, you can determine whether or not the group is right for you, and if it is, begin attending its meetings. Tip 15. Considering group era and purpose. When deciding if a reenactment group is a good fit for you, the two most important factors to consider are the group's era and purpose. For example, if you are primarily interested in medieval sewing techniques, you would feel out of place in a Hima club. Similarly, if you want to wear shiny plate armor, then a group that portrays the 12th century would not be right for you. Therefore, when you start researching reenactment groups near you, you should carefully note each group's goals and areas of focus. If this information isn't explicitly stated anywhere, contact the group's leader and ask for it. That way, you can avoid stumbling into a 14th century Buhurt group, meeting with crafting supplies for a 12th century tunic. Tip 16. Exploring group atmosphere. After era and purpose, the most important consideration when joining a reenactment group is its atmosphere. No two reenactment groups are alike, not even those that belong to an umbrella organization like the SCA. In some groups, new members are actively welcomed and enthusiastically offered loaner gear. In others, veteran reenactors will readily offer suggestions, but will leave new members to accumulate gear on their own. Some groups encourage drinking and smoking at their events. Others are more family-friendly. Some groups are rowdy. Some groups are quieter. Ultimately, it is up to you to decide if a particular group has an atmosphere you like. If it does, perfect, but if it doesn't, then you may want to consider finding a different group. Medieval reenactment is supposed to be a fun hobby, and it's difficult to have fun if your group's atmosphere makes you uncomfortable. Tip 17. A word of caution. The group dynamic variations described in the previous section are all healthy and normal. In many cases, you can eventually adjust to them, even if they initially make you uneasy. However, if you find yourself in a group with members who violate your boundaries, discourage you from participating due to your gender, sexual orientation, etc., or otherwise purposefully make you uncomfortable, you should leave that group immediately. The reenactment community is meant to be welcoming and accessible to everyone, and any reenactor who acts otherwise is a disgrace to the hobby. Please do not waste your time with them. There are plenty of other reenactors out there who will welcome you with open arms, no matter who you are or what you look like. So, on a lighter note, once you've found a reenactment group to join, it's time to start reenacting. To do that, you'll need at least a persona and a soft kit, both of which we'll explore more in the upcoming chapters. Chapter 1 Review. Medieval reenactment is a growing hobby where modern individuals recreate the lives of people from the 1100s to 1500s. For the sake of accuracy, reenactors should follow the right or not at all and document everything principles. However, they should also know when to balance these principles with practicality and fun. Joining a reenactment group is an integral part of the hobby. Types of reenactment groups include Hima clubs, Buhurt clubs, SCA branches, Empire of Medieval Pursuit branches, EraSpecific independent groups, CombatFocused independent groups. Viking reenactment, LARP, and jousting groups are not considered medieval reenactment groups, but are closely related to the hobby. The best places to find reenactment groups are on social media and at Renaissance fairs. Before you join a reenactment group, you should closely consider its purpose, era, and atmosphere.